Takaba is the reason there's aliens, or at least Takaba being manipulated by Kenjaku is the reason there is now aliens in the JJK universe. Yes, you're hearing me correctly. The universe's strongest sorcerer, their user of comedian, a technique that allows for Takaba to make anything that he deems funny in immediate reality, like an ocean filled with Fanta or an American Kenjaku. Reality immediately is the reason that aliens not only have cursed energy, but have shown up on Earth. But why would Takaba, self-admittedly just a comedian himself, try and create a universe that is not only filled with other sentient life that uses a power system identical to that of cursed energy, but also bring that sentient life to Earth? Well, it all boils down to the last thing that we ever saw Takaba do, which was bringing Kenjaku back to life. Because while we all assumed that Takaba and Kenjaku were just gonna go on a legendary two-man comedic run, Kenjaku is still Kenjaku, and therefore is the main antagonist of JJK's storyline, who spent 1,000 years trying to pull off the merger. It would make sense that just dying one time wouldn't stop him from some evil schemes. But how did all of this come to pass? How is Kenjaku manipulating Takaba? And how did that manipulation lead to aliens on Earth that are equal to a Sukuna-level threat? Well, today we're going to be talking about that and a whole lot more, because today we're talking Kenjaku created the aliens. But before we get to talking on who created what, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you want an additional Nick video every single week, or just feeling generous on account of the fact that I just bought a house and I'm fostering 9 puppies, and therefore I am bleeding money, you can find my Naruto reaction series and gain access to an additional half hour of my face every single week using the fourth wall link in my description below. We're on to the one-on-one fights, and Sasuke is getting all his chakra ripped out of his head. JJK now has a spin-off. That spin-off is 3 chapters into its run, and outside of the fact that Majulo is giving us additional JJK content, Majulo has actually begun to address some of the hanging plot lines that were left behind in JJK's main run. See, I actually made a video a couple of weeks ago talking about every single plot line that was abandoned by the end of JJK's manga, because as far as I knew, there was never going to be a JJK sequel. And yet, some of those abandoned plot lines, like the idea of Kenjaku flying over to America, wiping out the Secret Service, sitting down the American president, and showing him the immense power of cursed energy. Also, America would try and participate in the Culling Games, thus increasing the amount of cursed energy generated by the Culling Games, have begun to actually pay off plot-wise, even though they weren't necessarily wrapped up during JJK's main run. See, this is because in Chapter 1 of Majulo, we saw that Japanese citizens are now being abducted and sold into human trafficking rings to be used as batteries for the massive power source that is the cursed energy that leaks out of them. It's a plotline that was introduced in JJK and then seemingly forgotten by Gege Akutami is now getting its logical conclusion in the spin-off sequel. But because this precedent has now been set that Majulo is going to be able to address some of the left-behind plot lines that happened in JJK, it's not crazy to assume that we're gonna see this kind of thing happen again. And in fact, I believe the core story point of Majulo, the fact that aliens have come to Earth and they're able to use some power system that's eerily similar to that of Jujutsu sorcery on Earth, actually stems from Gege's want to close up what I identify as one of the worst plot threads left hanging at the end of JJK, which is the fact that for some reason, Gege decided to, in the last couple of chapters, introduce the idea that Takaba had brought either Kenjaku or Geto back to life, using his curse technique, Comedian, which allows him to do literally anything so long as he deems that it's funny, making Takaba a ridiculously powerful reality warper. However, he's not aware of how his curse technique works, and therefore he's not necessarily able to get the most utility out of this ridiculously powerful reality warping technique. However, this ridiculously powerful reality warping technique did allow for him to bring either Geto or Kenjaku back to life. Now, most people believe that the person who was brought back to life by Takaba was Kenjaku, because Takaba is one of the awakened sorcerers who becomes a sorcerer during the Culling Games, whose brain chemistry allowed him to become a sorcerer. However, he never awoke to Jujutsu, and therefore Takaba doesn't become a sorcerer until the Culling Games, and he never interfaces with Geto. It's not until Geto is long dead and his body's been taken over by Kenjaku that Takaba ever meets him, and Takaba adores Kenjaku. See, while technically Takaba and Kenjaku during the Culling Games engage in a life and death reality warping battle, Takaba, he's just kind of having fun with the first person he's ever found who understands his comedic style. And thus while Kenjaku is trying to find a way out of this ridiculous reality warping battle, Takaba is just doing things like romping around in an ocean filled with Fanta with his new best friend. And the climax of this battle between Takaba and Kenjaku is that the two of them become comedic partners and they perform in front of a sold-out crowd, something that makes Takaba so incredibly happy that he fake dies. But because Kenjaku was able to help Takaba achieve his lifelong dream, killing it in front of a sold-out comedy crowd, it's revealed after Kenjaku was decapitated by Yuta in the last couple of chapters of JJK that Takaba has brought most likely Kenjaku back to life. However, as to what a reality warper and undoubtedly the most powerful sorcerer in all of JJK and the main antagonist of JJK, Kenjaku, did after being paired up at the end of JJK's manga, we can't say. That is, until now. See, we know that Kenjaku wanted to enact the merger because he wanted to evolve cursed energy. He wanted to create something that went beyond the bounds of his own abilities. To create a cursed spirit so absurdly powerful that it would not only change what the definition of cursed energy and cursed spirits were on Earth, but also it would go far beyond the strength of either himself or Sukuna. Now, people often forget that this was Kenjaku's goal, because his rationale for eradicating the entirety of Japan's non-sorcerer population and merging them into one gigantic cursed spirit was because he wanted to see what happens. It wasn't anything grand or complicated. Kenjaku simply wanted to enact the merger because he didn't know what would happen if he enacted the merger. People often mix up what Kenjaku wanted to accomplish with what Geto wanted to accomplish because both of their plans included the elimination of all non-sorcerers in Japan. However, Geto wanted to eliminate all non-sorcerers in Japan by either awakening the entire population to the usage of cursed energy because those who are able to use cursed energy don't leak cursed energy, or by somehow finding a way to have the entire Japanese population undergo heavenly restriction so that cursed energy as a concept could be eliminated, getting rid of cursed spirits. But Kenjaku wanted to merge the entire non-sorcerer population of Japan into one gigantic cursed spirit to evolve cursed energy and see what he could accomplish. So while both of them wanted to get rid of all non-sorcerers, it was for very different reasons. And that's why it's very important for this theory that we believe that Takaba brought Kenjaku back, not Geto. So what if the reason that aliens and seemingly the entire universe has a power system similar to that of cursed energy on Earth is because Kenjaku tricked Takaba into thinking that it would be funny? Think about it. Takaba doesn't kill. That's why Yuta had to be the one to cut off Kenjaku's head at the end of Takaba and Kenjaku's, we'll call it a fight. Now, if Takaba did find death funny, he could have killed Kenjaku whenever. He could literally simply think, man, wouldn't the world be funnier without Kenjaku? And then Kenjaku would simply cease to exist. However, because that would be absurd and it would break the entire universe, Gege decided that Takaba, while he does believe violence can be funny, doesn't believe that death is funny. But because Takaba doesn't believe that death is funny, he also wouldn't believe that Kenjaku's initial plan for the merger would be funny, because the merger would kill the vast majority of the Japanese population. And therefore, Kenjaku could never convince Takaba to enact something even remotely close to the initial plan for the merger. But just because Kenjaku wouldn't be able to convince Takaba to enact the merger in the way that it was initially planned, doesn't mean that when Kenjaku was brought back to life by Takaba, he stopped having devilish schemes about evolving cursed energy. And thus, if Kenjaku still wanted to find a way to evolve cursed energy, he would have to find a way to do it without human death. Because while we're not entirely sure what the contract of Kenjaku coming back to life meant to Takaba, I seriously doubt Takaba would let Kenjaku go around killing people. Kenjaku might be closer to a living, breathing, walking puppet than he is an individual with individual wills and thoughts. But we can't say for sure. What we can say for sure is that Kenjaku's probably not out there openly murdering people like he used to be. But if Kenjaku wanted to be able to evolve cursed energy without human death, how could he accomplish that? I mean, the entire idea sounds patently ridiculous when you consider everything Kenjaku had to do to be able to try and evolve cursed energy the first time. I mean, Kenjaku planned the Culling Games for 1,000 years. He specifically modified the brain chemistry and activated dozens, if not hundreds, of cursed items to not only awaken a bunch of sorcerers to new cursed energy techniques that they could now use, but also to bring previously deceased sorcerers back to life in new host bodies. Also, that hundreds of sorcerers could battle it out in the Culling Games, spiking how much cursed energy was being used in Japan. Also, that those newly minted sorcerers or newly brought back to life sorcerers could be killed, and the cursed energy that they were controlling could be be absorbed by the barriers that made up the culling games. By absorbing all this additional cursed energy that was brought to the modern day by hundreds of new sorcerers bursting onto the scene, Kenjaku could then take all of this additional cursed energy and use it to initiate a merger between the non-sorcerer population of Japan and Tengen. And then, and only then, would Kenjaku get what he wants. Like I said, this entire plan took 1,000 years to plan. It took backshots from Yuji's dad. It took the revival of Sukuna. And without the strengthening of cursed energy by turning the majority of Japan into an active battlefield, by injecting hundreds of new sorcerers to battle it out in the streets, none of it would be possible. So how could a merger level event occur without human death? Well, reality warping. See, the only reason that Kenjaku had to jump through 1,000 years of hoops is because he didn't have the comedian curse technique. He was never a sorcerer so powerful that he could turn an entire ocean into soda on a whim. Well, I'm not saying that Kenjaku killed Takaba and took over his body and is now using the comedian curse technique to reality warp this new version of the JJK universe into whatever he wants. What I am saying is that over the years that Kenjaku and Takaba spent together, Kenjaku could slowly but surely condition Takaba to believe that certain things were funny. Things like how it would be so funny if cursed energy existed everywhere in the universe, and aliens could use cursed techniques, something that Kenjaku could probably accomplish by talking to Takaba about how fun it would be to perform comedy on other alien planets, or how fun it would be to have aliens in their crowds at their shows, and by stoking those flames, by getting Takaba to think about what jokes he would tell to aliens. But in order to ever tell those jokes to aliens, one, aliens need to exist, and two, those aliens need to be able to get to Earth, because they don't know where those aliens are, so they might as well come here. But in order to aliens to be able to get to Earth, they would have to have a certain level of sophistication, science prowess, and power. Things that they could all accomplish with sorcery. It's established in Chapter 2 of Majulo that the aliens were most likely able to survive the years that they spent in space looking for a habitable planet because all of the 50,000 Sumerians on this giant mothership had some kind of sorcery powers that allowed for them to stay self-sufficient for longer. And thus, these Sumerians' ability to travel through the vastness of space hinges entirely on the fact that the majority of them have some kind of jujutsu abilities, and thus they wouldn't have been able to get to Earth without the wrinkle that they can use cursed energy. And thus, if Kenjaku was able to condition Takaba into thinking like this, thinking about the idea of performing comedy to aliens, but understanding that aliens can only get here if they can use cursed energy, it would explain why the Sumerians' powers operate exactly like cursed energy on Earth. Something the Sumerians themselves have admitted to in the first couple of pages of Chapter 1, and something that's been verified not only through the Sumerians showing off abilities similar to that of cursed techniques, but also verified with small moments like in Chapter 3, when Malu talks about his third eye cursed technique, we'll call it, being connected to his twin brother, saying that he and his twin brother share this cursed technique, and if Malu uses it more, then it'll be passed down to his twin brother. We know on Earth, twins are a bad omen, at least when it comes to jujutsu families, because twins are seen as the same when it comes to jujutsu. This is why Maki wasn't able to achieve full heavenly restriction until Mai died, and why Sukuna's twin brother, who he consumed in the womb, reincarnated in every era that Sukuna existed in. So this idea that Malu and Cross share a, let's call it, cursed technique, confirms that their power system works almost identically to that of cursed energy on Earth. On top of this, if this was Kenjaku and Takaba's doing, it would explain why the Sumerians ended up on Earth as opposed to one of the other infinite amount of habitable planets in the multiple universes. On top of this, while the introduction of cursed energy to the entire universe might seem like a funny concept to Takaba, as not only would it allow for little green men to travel through the universe and use funny little abilities, but it would also open the door to the idea of these little green men possibly sitting in the crowd of Kenjaku and Takaba's comedy shows, laughing at the jokes that Takaba writes. The sudden introduction of cursed energy to the entire universe would be disastrous, which could explain why the Sumerians had to leave their planet, as the immediate introduction of cursed energy to all sentient planets would spark massive global wars, as the introduction of an entirely new, non-discriminate power system would allow for the evil to fight against the good, the disenfranchised to fight against their governments, the power-hungry to continue to grind their boots into the poor, and so much more. There's a reason that Japanese citizens are being kidnapped and sold into human trafficking, and it's because this power system that only exists in Japan is a ridiculously useful useful asset to those who are trying to up their stake in the world. Now imagine cursed energy existed in the entire globe. Armies would be comprised of sorcerers, and battles would be disastrously devastated. Human lives would be lost every single minute to cursed spirits. The world would look closer to the world of Chainsaw Man than it would to JJK. And with the spreading of cursed energy across an entire universe, there's a possibility that while on some planets global wars didn't break out, there is the possibility that the cursed energy of the planet got so incredibly powerful that it created cursed spirits that took over the globe, forcing the sentient, non-cursed spirit life forms to flee their planets. And in Chapter 3, when Malu and Tsurugi are fighting, Malu reveals that leaving his home planet was not up to him, implying that either he was forced by the other Sumerians to leave, or that all of the Sumerians were forced to flee their planet. But this seems like a relatively odd concept when you consider the fact that all of these 50,000 Sumerians can use Jujutsu, and they've been designated with a level of power akin to that of Sukuna. And therefore, if they're running from something, that something they're running from needs to be more powerful than Sukuna. But why come to Earth? Well, this has to be a multi-pronged plan from Kenjaku, something that we know he's very good at. Well, see, well, yes, you can bathe the entire universe in cursed energy using Takaba's comedian curse technique, but you also have to make sure that those aliens, after their planets have become uninhabitable from the introduction of cursed energy, then end up on Earth. Because Kenjaku can't see how aliens have evolved cursed energy if they never end up on Earth. And thus, Earth has to be turned into a somewhat safe haven for alien life. And more specifically, Japan has to be turned into a safe haven for alien life. How do you do that? Well, obviously, these aliens, the Sumerians, have already identified that Earth has a power system similar to the one that they may be afflicted by. And I say may be afflicted by because Malu talked about his curse technique that comes from his third eye as a curse of sorts. And while he doesn't say those words exactly, he talks about how he doesn't want to use his curse technique all that often because the more he uses it, the higher chance it's passed down to his little brother, making it seem as though Malu doesn't want his little brother to be affected by this curse technique. But anyways, I digress. The Sumerians have identified that some humans on Earth are called sorcerers, and they can use cursed energy, a power system similar to the one that they all can use. However, not at a rate that humanity poses a threat to them. See, the Sumerians know, as well as the humans, that they could launch a conquest on this planet and take it over lickety-split. But why is that the reality for Earth right now? Well, because cursed spirits have begun to fade into obscurity from Earth. We learned in Chapter 3 that over the last couple of decades, cursed spirits have stopped appearing anywhere outside of Tokyo. A lie that was actually told to the general populace in JJK after the Culling Games so that the populace of Japan wouldn't freak out about the possibility of cursed spirits being able to pop up anywhere. But because cursed spirits are now much less frequent in Japan, cursed energy has also begun to dip in Japan, which has led to a weakening of sorcerers in Japan, with sorcerers as powerful as Yuji and Yuta and Gojo and Sukuna now being a thing of the past, and thus the world's defenses, things like Gojo and even Sukuna, are now gone, leaving the gates wide open for aliens to fly in. And rather perfectly, the security treaty, which has been talked about too many times to ignore, that was signed by all of the governments of the world, or at least all of the important governments of the world, has designated that Japan will deal with anything paranormal, that being cursed spirits, and now, most importantly, aliens. See, literally the first thing that we learned from Majula was that in Chapter 1, the aliens, the Sumerians, tried to go to America, as they had heard that America was the strongest nation on Earth. Shout out to us, I guess. That's what happens when you don't have universal health care and care about your citizens. You get tanks I'll never see. That's fine. I'll just breathe carbon emissions with no universal health care for the rest of my life. Why not? Trains would be cool, but we could bomb the Middle East. Anyways, even though America is the strongest nation on Earth, Japan has been designated as the country that has to deal with all supernatural entities. But that's convenient, right? See, we understand that Kenjaku has the capacity to manipulate things like geopolitics. He literally broke into the White House to have a sit-down conversation with the president who he was essentially holding hostage. So isn't it kind of convenient that the country that Kenjaku lives in would be designated as the country that would deal with something like alien threats, ensuring that if aliens were ever to come to Earth, a concept that Kenjaku, with the help of Takaba, has made an inevitability, that those aliens would end up in Japan, the place where Kenjaku would be able to observe if they have evolved cursed energy in the way he wanted it to be evolved. And thus, in a roundabout way, Kenjaku would be able to use Takaba's curse technique comedian to evolve cursed energy in the way that he wanted without human death and bring that evolved cursed energy to Japan, a country that he has been from the shadows weakening weakening slowly but surely over the decades by lessening the amount of cursed energy created in Japan, thus lessening the amount of cursed spirits and weakening sorcerers, keeping the possibility of Japan's population being eliminated by evolved cursed energy alive over the course of the 67 years it's been since the Culling Games. And considering the fact that these aliens are able to use a power system identical to that of cursed energy, have been designated as a Sukuna level threat, powers that currently go far beyond the scope of what humanity can accomplish, and are actively considering destroying all of Japan so they can take over the globe, I would say in a way Kenjaku has accomplished exactly what he has been trying to accomplish for 1,000 years. In the only way that Kenjaku's plans can be foiled is if the Sumerians decide to live amongst humanity instead of destroying them. But even in that case, Kenjaku would be able to see what evolved cursed energy looks like in the hands of the Sumerians, and thus in either the scenario of conquest or cohabitation, Kenjaku's curiosity gets quenched. And I think that's really cool. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. Do you believe that Takaba and Kenjaku had anything to do with the introduction of aliens to the Earth, or do you believe it's all disconnected? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I haven't worked out in 2 weeks because I had the flu, and then I got the puppies.